Hi, I'm Claudette with theycallmemartha.com, and today I'm going to show you how to make this cute little journal, or if you want to call it a mini album by adding photographs, that'll work too. It goes together very quickly and easily, and I'm going to show you how you can put it together either using this paper collection, which is called Love Story by Teresa Collins Studio. It is a digital download that you can print at home, or you can use any paper that you have in your stash just to kind of change up the theme. So let me first start by showing you how the journal is put together, and then I'll walk you through how I constructed it. So to attach the pages to the book, you'll want to group them together in what's called a signature, and that grouping will then be attached to the cover of the book to form the binding. So I've added an elastic band here, and then in the back I've added a second one. You could add a third and a fourth if you wanted to. It just kind of depends how big you want your journal to be or how customized you want it to be. So when I walk you through how I put this together today, I'll show you how to do it with two. And then, like I said, you can kind of add or subtract as you want to. So let me talk about what I have used to put together this album. So if you want to make it exactly like I've done it, you're going to need some double-sided paper. And here I've cut mine down to 8.5 by 8.5. And if you want to make this journal taller, wider, just customize it to whatever dimensions you want. Just knowing that each of the pages is going to be scored in half and folded, and that's how it connects inside. So if you want it to be a wider album, you'll want to start with a wider sheet of paper. If you want it to be a shorter album, of course, you'll start with a shorter piece of paper. So totally up to you and how you want to put that together. So I have 6 double-sided pieces of paper that I've printed off for this project. And you'll see that some of them I'm going to cut down slightly just to add some visual interest. But for the most part, they'll all go into the album the same way. So again, 6 of your papers. And again, I'm starting at 8.5 by 8.5. All right, I'm going to start with my cover for my journal, and I'm using clear acetate paper. If you want to just use regular paper that goes with your theme, just go ahead and cut an additional piece. And in this case, my height of my journal is 8.5. And for this cover, I'm going to do a width of 10.25. The reason why I've done a width of 10.25, let me bring my journal back in here, is I've created an integrated pen loop that is part of the back cover so that when I pop my pen in there, it will stay attached to the journal. And so what I did was I allowed that extra width. If you look at I have a piece of scratch paper underneath here so you can see. I've written in Sharpie marker where I'm going to cut, but this becomes that tab that I'm going to fold back over and attach to the back of my my journal. And so I'm just using the scratch paper to show myself where to cut. So one thing, if you're using clear acetate paper that I just want to bring to your attention, this particular brand, this one's made by Teresa Collins. It is super high quality, and it comes in clear, and then she offers a pattern, foil patterned set that is in, I think 4 or 5 different colors. I want to say it's gold, silver, black, and maybe pink. And I'm using the silver heart today because I thought it matched the paper really well. But if you're using clear acetate, normally they have like a scratch-proof piece of film on the back. And so I'm just going to use a little hook here and make sure that I have the right side of my paper. And usually I just go into the corner of the paper until I find it. And that way I know what side is the right side and what side is the wrong side. So see, I've pulled up just that little bit of that film on the back, and that's just a scratch protected cover. But so this is my right side, so I know that because this is the film that I'm going to pull off the back. And so if this is going to become my cover, I want these pretty foil hearts to be facing up. So when I fold my cover, essentially it's going to fold like this. So my pretty foil hearts are facing out, and that protective coating is on the inside. So I reference that because when we go to cut this tab, we need to make sure that we're cutting it out of the correct side of the paper. So again, this is 8.5 inches tall and 10.25 inches wide. I'm going to take my clear acetate film and actually turn it upside down on top of my little piece of scratch paper. And you can eyeball this tab. You don't have to be exact. This is 1 inch wide, this tab, and I've pulled it in about 1.5 inches from the edge of my cover to allow for that ability to loop it over and to close it on the inside. But you can determine where on the journal you want your tab to be. If you want it to be more centered, you just move your tab down. The only thing I caution you is that you understand how tall your pen is relative to your journal so that you're putting it in the right place. For example, you wouldn't want to put that tab, down lower if your pen is really tall, because then your pen is going to hang lower than your journal. So that's why mine's kind of up in this area. And again, this is not, you don't have to be exact here, but these are the dimensions that I used, and I'll write this in the video description if you want the exact measurements. But what I'm going to do is use this little scratch piece of paper as a guide for where to trim this little tab. And so again, I've taken my clear acetate paper and I've put it right side down, and I think I'm just going to use my scissors and freehand this, and I'm going to cut right over that scratch piece of paper because I can see clear through it. And I'm going to cut up to that tab and then cut it away. And so again, this allows us to have a tab that is connected to the cover. And I just kind of thought it would be a little stronger if I did it this way versus trying to attach something later on. So let me pull all these little scraps away. And so now you're left with a piece that looks like that. And so this little tab is going to fold over and attach to the back of my cover so that I have a place to put my pen. Something else to keep in mind, you might want to make this tab a little longer if you've got a thicker pen. So something, for example, like this is going to be a thicker pen, and you'll want to have a longer length to create your little tab. And if you don't want a pen loop, you can skip this step. Just cut that off, right? And make sure that your paper is, or your cover is just slightly bigger than your journal pages. Okay, so now we've got our little tab in there, and we're going to come back to that later. So I have the length of my cover along the top of my scoreboard, and I'm using a 12-inch scoreboard, and I'm going to score in 2 places. My first score line is going to be the finished, what I want the finished width of my journal to be, which is 4 1/4. So I'm going to score the first one at 4 1/4. And when you're scoring clear acetate paper, you want to make sure you take a really firm hand with it and hold it down, because it will want to slip and slide underneath you. So I know you can't see it on the camera, but I did score at 4 1/4. So now I'm going to add my second score line for that gusset, and it's just going to be 1/4 inch wide. So again, my first score was at 4 1/4, and so now I'm going to score at 4 1/2. Again, really hold your paper down firmly so that it doesn't slide on you. And so what you're left with, let me move my scoreboard out of the way, and hopefully you can see this on black. Well, let me bring my scratch paper back in. I have 2 score lines now, and I've created that gusset. So now I'm just going to come back through and burnish down my score lines, and I'm just going to use my bone folder, and I'm just going to burnish both of them down. And one other tip, when you're scoring and burnishing acetate paper, you really want to take your time, because once you put a crease in it, you'll always see it. It has no forgiveness at all. So I'm just taking my time. I'm lining up my edges here and holding it firm while I press with my bone folder. And just give it a nice clean burnish. And you'll want to work both of those folds back and forth a couple of times just to make sure that your album is straight. Okay, so now I have my gusset in there, and I'm going to go ahead and set my cover aside. while we work with some of the pages. Okay, so that's ready to go. Here's our pen loop that we're going to attach in the back in a little bit. Okay, so go ahead and set your cover aside. And so the next thing I'm going to do is pick out the paper that I want to show through my cover. And I chose this one. I did on one side the blush colored stripe, and then on the back side I did a heart. So you can see here where, because I was using a patterned cover on my acetate, I wanted something a little less busy to be underneath so that I could kind of see those layers, but that it wasn't too busy. And just, I'll show you what I mean. If I were to have used this paper underneath, you see here is it's kind of messy to me, right? I can tell that there's hearts on hearts, but it's just a little harder on the eyes. So again, that's why I chose something that was a little bit less busy and allowed me to appreciate the pattern that was on my cover, but also appreciate the collection, the paper collection that I was using inside. Okay, so this is going to be my first page, and I'm going to bring my scoreboard back in. And what I'm going to do is score each one of my pages in half. So again, these are 8.5 by 8.5, and I'm going to do a score at 4.25. Make sure your paper is oriented the proper way. So, for example, you don't want your hearts going sideways, and then you score your paper, and now your hearts are going to be sideways in your album. So make sure that your design is facing upright when you do make that score. Now on my next page, I'm going to basically do the same thing. So the next page I used this one. And again, you can put these in any order you want. You can pick different patterns. I'm just going through and showing you how I created this album, but I think what makes it really cool is that you can add exactly what you like. If you want 3 pages, make 3 pages. If you want 6, put 6. You can always add or subtract pretty easily. So here's my third page, and again, I'm scoring it at 4.25. So I have 3 pages kind of all ready to go. And what I'm going to do is fold and burnish each one of these. Okay, so I'm going to take my 3 papers and basically I'm going to nest them together so that they create what's called a signature. So I've got my first page, my second page, and my third page. Actually, I think I'm going to flip that one around like that. So I'm nesting them all together, and I've already folded and burnished them down. And this becomes a signature. And so when I bring my cover back in, this is going to connect to my clear acetate cover. And the way that this connects is by using a piece of elastic. And so this stuff is called Beading elastic cord. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the video description box. I got it on Amazon. So I've got a piece of elastic cord. It's about, I would say about 18 inches around. And I'm just going to loop it around the pages and tie a knot. Now you want to tie it tight enough that it holds your album together, but not so tight that it wants to pull in on your album. You know, so kind of make sure your album stays flat. I'm going to put one knot in and hold it with my finger while I tie a second loop and knot it so that it stays and it's permanent. So I'm just going to fiddle with it here until I can get it. It's kind of like wrapping a present, I guess, or putting ribbon on a present. And I'm just going to pull it nice and tight. And then I'm going to come in with some scissors and trim off those tails. I'm going to get as close to that knot as possible, but not cut the knot through. And so basically what you've done is you've created a loop. This looks kind of like a big hair tie, right? But that's what's holding this group of pages to my cover, all right? And that extra gusset that we put in our cover is going to allow for that width of adding an additional grouping of pages. So what's really cool about this technique is it's totally flexible. You can add as many as your album will allow for, right? The width of it. Or you can tuck things underneath in the middle. You can add an additional signature, so add another loop and put additional pages in the front if you want. I'm just showing the basic technique of how this thing goes together. So this is our first grouping. And so if I bring my original back in, I can kind of show you how this is coming together. So here's our cover, and our first page. And on the right, I show you from my example, the cover and our first page. I'm going to come back in later and show you how I embellished it. But here is that second page. And you can see I've just added a flap, which I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But here's our second page. And then when we turn that, here's our third page, right? And I've added in a little pocket. Again, we're going to embellish that later. But here's our third page. And now here's the middle of our album. And then, again, I'm turning the page. And you can see in my example on the right, this is where I've added an additional signature. So if I just pull this out, you can see that here is that original page that was part of our original signature. And then the back of our book, right? So we've added in all those pages, and now I'm going to show you how to add this other little signature inside that you can loop just like you did the first set. We can loop that and attach it to our book to add that flexibility of adding in more pages really quickly and easily. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take, let's go ahead and set this aside, and I've cut, let's see, I've cut an additional paper here. This is 8 1/4 by 8 1/2. And what I'm going to do is score it down the middle, and then I'm going to trim it down. And the reason why I'm going to do it that way is I want this additional signature to be slightly more narrow than the original signature so that it has some visual interest. You can see the layering of the papers underneath, and it just makes I think this particular signature a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and score this down the middle. So I'm going to make sure my paper is oriented properly. I've got 8 1/2 by 8 1/2, and I'm going to score it in half at 4 1/4. And I'm going to fold and burnish this just like I did our original paper. Okay, so now I've got the starting of this little signature, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it down. Let me bring my paper trimmer in. I'm going to bring in my small one. And I think I'm going to want my stripes on the outside, so I'm going to fold it this way. And I've got the XOXO inside. And I'm just going to trim off, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. You can just eyeball it and do kind of whatever you feel like is right. So now my little folded piece is more narrow than my original pages. And that's the piece that I cut off. And so this is going to become my additional signature. So if I pull my book back in, I tucked it right here in my original album. So I'm just going to come back in again with another piece of that elastic. It's about 18 inches long. And I'm laying this in approximately where I want it in the book. So I have the choice. I can put it in the back of my first signature, or I could actually add it within the original signature just by popping in that paper. And then when I tie my loop of elastic, I'm just going to make sure I catch that page. So let me go ahead and knot this really quick. Okay, so I'm just going to trim these little tails. And now I've added in a second signature in my book. And so here I've added a page within a page. And then what's really cool, let me bring my example back in, is then you can start to tuck other things inside of it. So this is just a little passport journal that I'm adding in because I think it's beautiful, number one. I love the silver glitter. It really matches the hearts and the pen that I wanted for this design. And I can just find the middle of it and add it right underneath that elastic band. So I'm just adding it in, and now this is part of that binding as well. And again, I like how it adds dimension and interest to my pages. If I didn't want it here, I could put it here underneath that elastic band. Right? I could add an additional elastic band if I wanted it to be, somewhere else, like in the back of the book, I could do that. And then the other thing I did on my original is, and I pulled this out, but I just created a page that instead of it being rectangular when it's folded, I just trimmed it out to be a heart. And so that can go underneath that elastic band as well. And so that is now a very interesting piece, adds dimension and interest to your journal, and it just so quickly is added into this book, right? So let me show you how I did this piece. So here's my paper that is 8.5 by 8.5. And the first thing I'm going to do is score it down the middle. I always want to start out with that score line so that I know my pages are going to be the right size. So I'm scoring at 4 1/4. And now when I go ahead and fold and burnish this, I can make some decisions about what shape do I want it to be. So in this case, it's kind of easy. I'm going to make a heart out of it, but maybe you want it to be a circle. So in this case, I'm just going to freehand a heart, and I'm going to start with that fold on my left-hand side, and I'm just going to cut a heart. Kind of reminds me of when I was a little kid and I used to make things in art class. You make snowflakes, you make hearts on, you know, for Valentine's Day, whatever. And so now I have my little heart that I can add to the middle of my book. So here's my original, and here's that heart that I've just cut out of the paper, and I can add it to my album just like that by tucking it underneath that elastic band. So let me show you 2 more things that I did to this album to give it some interest. So this was our first page, and remember I said I was going to teach you how to make this little flap. So our original page, if you recall, was 8.5 by 8.5. We scored it in half, and that became our page 2. So here it is right here. But I went ahead and cut another of the papers, and let me get the dimensions of this. This is 6 1/4 by then 8.5. And this is going to become this little flap right here. And so all I did is I put a score line in the paper, attached it to the back of my paper, and it then became a flap on this side and a pocket on this side. So let me show you how I did that. So let me bring my scoreboard back out. And I'm just going to score this paper. Again, I'm watching to make sure that my writing is in the correct orientation. And I'm just going to score this at about, oh, I'd say, this is, let's see, this is 6 1/4 inches wide. I think I'm going to do it at 3.5. So I'm going to score that at 3.5. And I'm going to use my bone folder once again. And then I'm just going to fold and burnish that score line. And again, this side is my flap, and this side is going to become my pocket. So if I bring my book back over, this paper right here, this is going to attach like this. Right? Here's my flap. And then on this side, it's going to be my pocket. Now you have some decisions to make. Let me just bring my original back in and show you. So in this one, I put in this little thumb notch. You don't have to do that, right? But if you want to be able to kind of reach in there more, you can do that. All you have to do is take a paper punch in a circle. This is 1.5 inches. And you can go ahead and punch halfway through that paper. Just by lining it up on the back and punching it, right? Don't go all the way in. You just want to create a little notch. And just as a tip, some of your paper punches have this little notch. And if you're ever wondering what that was, that is the halfway point of your circle. So if you were to punch this and want to have it halfway, if you line up the edges here with that notch and on this side, you're going to get an exact half circle of that punch. Okay, so if you want to, you can go ahead and punch that. The other thing you can do is you can embellish the edging with some washi tape, like I did in my original. So here I added that washi tape to the edge of my flap, as well as the edge of my pocket. I would highly recommend that you do this before you glue it into your book, just because it's easier to do it that way. And then the other thing I recommend is, even though it's washi tape and it's sticky, I do suggest that you put a thin bead of glue underneath it so that as your journal ages, the adhesive that's behind your washi tape will not break down and try to peel up. I learned the hard way. I was going through some old albums recently, and back when, you know, we first got started in paper crafting, and I think our glues were not as good as they are today, and it's sad to see some of my hard work kind of fall apart. So I'm extra aware of it now. So I'm just going to add a very, very, very light bead of glue right along this edge, and that's where my washi tape is going to go. And then the other tip I have for you, if you follow me, you've already heard me say this tip, but if you're new, I like to let baby wipes sit out overnight, clean baby wipes, and become completely dry. And you see here I've got this oozing glue that's coming out. If you use a dry baby wipe, it will pick up all that glue, and you won't transfer or smear anything that might have been on your fingers or any ink that might have gotten wet when you were gluing, just by using that dry baby wipe. So I have these handy all the time. I use them every time I paper craft. In fact, I use them more dry than I do wet. Okay, so I've added the glue, I've added in my little bit of washi tape, and when that dries, I'll come back and trim those edges. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. This is one of my favorite washi tapes by Teresa Collins. I love the little dainty heart, and you can use it in things that are not even Valentine's-y, right? It's just so cute. It is, I think it's on her I think it's still available on her website, and it's part of the, I think it's called the Bright Side collection of washi tapes. Her tapes come, I think, 5 or 6 rolls to a set, and this happens to be one of a set. All right, so now I've added washi tape to both sides. I'm going to come in and trim my edges. And then if you want to, now is if you were going to add that little thumb notch, now is when you would want to add it after your washi tape is in there. So on this side, I'm just going to line up those little notches on the side of my paper punch. And I'm just eyeballing it in the center of the page, and I just give that a quick little punch, and now you see I have a half circle, and it allows for me to again have that thumb notch. All right, now all we need to do is glue this to our page 2, and so I'm just lining it up on the edge of the page, and then I'm going to add a little bit of glue along the bottom. I'm using my dry baby wipe to pick up that excess glue, and I'm going to add a little bit more glue here on that edge and glue that one down as well. And so now you have a pocket on this side like that, and you have a flap on this side. Now you may want to come in and add a little bit of glue just on the bottom side of this edge, just to attach this pocket here, right? So a little bit of glue here, a little bit here, and a little bit there. All right, now we're gonna go to the back of our album, and here I wanted to add a pocket. So let me show you my original. So here I've added a little pocket right here. And so you just want to cut a piece of paper that's the same width as your page, and then whatever height you want your pocket to be. If you want a super deep pocket, you create a taller pocket just by cutting a longer piece of paper, or a more shallow pocket, obviously you would cut it shorter. So here I have cut a piece that is 4 1/4 by, I think I did 4 1/4 by 4 1/2. So my pocket width is 4 1/4, which is the same as my paper. And then my height is 4 1/2. Now I'm only gluing on 3 sides, just this left edge, the bottom, and the right. And I'm going to use my dry baby wipe just to pick up any of that excess glue. The wet glue allows me a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that all my edges are lined up. And I think, you know, just as a little tip, if you spend a few minutes on the finishing details of your project, like making sure that your folds are burnished, making sure that your edges line up, making sure that there's no glue that seeps out, you're going to end up with a much more finished looking project in the end. Take that few extra minutes, and I'm sure you'll find that the end result is a far nicer finish. Okay, so now I've added my little pocket, and then I'm going to add a little bit of washi tape, just like I did on the little flap that we created. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of glue right here. And then my washi tape. You certainly could have done this before you glued your pocket down, but you can add it later too if you want. And I'm just going to make sure that I go right along the edge of my pocket. Come back in with my dry baby wipe, pick up all that excess glue, and make sure that my tape is stuck down. And I will give it a moment to dry before I go to trim it. And now I have my little pocket detail. So all that's really left on this cute little journal is to embellish it. So I used the cut-aparts that were part of this paper collection I'm working with just to give me some really cute little embellishments and quotes and things that I could integrate into the journal just to make it more interesting. If you're using a different paper collection, just look at your papers and see what you can either cut apart, or maybe you have a series of stamps that you want to integrate for some titles and some sentiments. Just use what you have, but basically you do want to add in a few elements here and there that add interest to your album. It really helps give it some character. So let me show you what I cut out. And I just cut out various sentiments, quotes, several of these cute little hearts. And then I came back in and I added them in various places. And so let's start with the cover. The one thing about using clear acetate paper is that when you flip it open, you can see what's on the back side. And if I had not backed this with another matching heart, you would have seen the back side of the paper, and it might not have been very attractive. So just keep that in mind when you're working with clear acetate. If you want to add something on the cover, make sure that you have an additional one for the back that you can add to cover up the back of the element from the other side. So that's what I did here. And then to layer it a little bit, this was Love Notes is something I cut out of that one quote paper. And I just literally laid it on top of the heart, covering what was pre-printed there with Love Notes. Now, that's just a style thing. If you don't like that and you like what this already says, then keep it as is. But that's what I did. So I layered that in, and I created another one of these so that I could, again, put this on my cover and have one for the back side to cover it up. So that's what I did on my cover. And then you can see here in various places where I've added in some of these elements that I cut out. The other thing I did is I used a hole punch. I went to into my stash, and for example, I had this little heart. And what I did is I just came back in and punched some of the matching papers to give me, some additional embellishments that I could then add to my album. And so that's exactly what I did here, is I just cut that out and added that in. Something else I did is I just took a paper clip, and I was lucky enough to find a red one that matched perfect. And I took one of the hearts from this collection, came like this. And you can see here as I turned it into a little paper clip. And so all I did was I took that heart. I could have freehanded it out if I wanted to, but I just thought it would be easier just to put it in my little hole punch, or paper punch, I guess, and punch that out, and then use this piece for my paper clip. And then what you can do to make it stronger is just out of scrap cardstock, I created a couple of more punches, and I just layered them and glued them together, and then glued that to my paper clip. So then this can become an element that you can add to the top of your book or within the book itself. So just one other fun little thing that I did. I did the same thing with this one. Let's see here. I just glued it to the back of a paper clip, or taped it, I guess, in this case. And that became kind of another one of those little fun little elements that I could add to my book. So look at what you have in your paper collection, cut some things out, and then this will help us with the decorating part of the album. All right, let me show you really quick how I make super quick and easy tags. So these were just some scraps that I had left over after I cut my papers down. And so these are about 2.5 inches wide by about 5 inches long. And so all you have to do to create a tag is to cut an angled corner on the top right. And if you're like me and it drives you crazy when they're uneven, if you take this little corner that you've cut off and you flip it over and put it on the opposite side and trim that away, it will be identical to the one that you just cut off on the right. So see, now I've got an identical edge, or the angle is identical on either side. All you have to do is punch a hole in the middle and then set an eyelet. And now you have a tag. So you can finish it with some ribbon or some colored threads. And then these can either be added to your pockets like that, the side pockets, or there's also a pocket back here where you can put one in. It's up to you. All right, the last step in this journal is to create this pen loop in the back, and I just want to show you how I did that. And one thing I think I forgot to review with you is, if you recall at the top of this video, I had mentioned that there was a protective film on the back of your clear acetate paper. Make sure you peel that off to finish your album. So I did peel that off, and you can see that this is now crystal clear. And so in the back here, where we want to create our pen loop, let me just put a piece of paper under here so it's a little easier to see. All we want to do, we're going to need an eyelet, or if you have a brad, that will work as well. And whatever pen you want to close in your journal. And I'm just laying my pen on top, lining it up with the edge of my journal here, and I'm just going to wrap it and just kind of create a visual marker of where I think that needs to go. And then all I need to do is punch a hole and set my eyelet. So I'm lining that up. I'm going to punch my hole. Let's see, it's wide enough. And I'm going to try not to crease this edge, right? I'm going to try to leave it kind of rounded. If it creases, it creases. It's not that big a deal, but... And I'm going to punch my hole, make sure that I catch this edge, and then I'm going to set my eyelet through that hole and crimp it down. If you're like me, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of eyelets in your stash. Something that probably looks like this. And so I have been looking for all sorts of different ways that I can utilize them. And I'm finding that I really like using them because you can create so many different things with them, right? So here is my pen loop. And I'm just going to push my pen through. And now I have that integrated loop in my journal. And you can do things like you can tie some charms along the edge of your elastic. You can leave it just as it is, but let me just do a quick walkthrough one more time so you can see the embellishments here. I've gone through and added most of them. So here's the one on my cover. I added a companion one on the back end so that you wouldn't see the back of that heart. And then here I've just added my little cut apart and one of those little hearts that I punched out with a sticker. And I matted one of these little sentiments on some scrap paper that just coordinated. And then here I added just this cut apart here, and I cut my edge flush on the edge of my journal. Here I've added a little flag with a heart sticker, and you can see just by adding a simple little sticker with a pop of color, it kind of brings the whole project together. Here I've added in love story, and I've done a similar treatment here where I'm extending these papers through the album so that you can see how they coordinate. Here's another one of those red hearts, another matted sentiment, and then in the back, another one of these hearts. So I hope you like this quick and easy little journal project. I had a lot of fun making them. I love the format, and it's so easy to put together. I think the possibilities are endless for customized little journals like this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts and ideas about a project like this. And if you like my work and you want to follow me, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel as well.